Yearning to play a few rounds of Gwent. That ought to set me straight.
It's Commander's Horn, episode 68. Today I am joined by Mogwai and Delta to talk all about Gwent Open number 3, the first official tournament of 2018, and one of the best tournaments that we have had to date. Mogwai and I just recently returned from Warsaw, where it all went down. Also, Nilfgaard and Monsters are locked in a faction battle with new rewards on the line. We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Commander's Horn. Welcome back once again to Commander's Horn, a weekly Gwent podcast. I am your host, Dane, McBeard, and today I'm joined by my co-host, competitive correspondent, Delta65, as well as my guest and colleague, MegaMogwai. We're going to be talking about a great weekend of Gwent. Gentlemen, how are you today?
Pretty good. How about you?
Feeling great, honestly. Feeling great.
We just got back from Warsaw. Mogwai, did you have how was your ride home? Mine was uneventful, but anything crazy? People always have crazy stories about it. Seems like since we talked to like people like 10, 12 people that all take flights home, somebody seems to always have some crazy thing that happens to them. Were you free of any of that stuff?
No, mine was actually pretty boring, and I always take the last flight, and I have to take 2 flights as well. So basically, it's always an entire Monday in the airport for me, and I arrive home at midnight, and that's pretty much it, you know. But it was the end of one hell of a week for me. It was great, and you know, Warsaw is fantastic.
Warsaw's always a good time. Delta, you took in some of Gwent Open number 3, I imagine. How did you enjoy the tournament? What did you think of it in light of all of the things that are surrounding Gwent right now? In a vacuum, how did the tournament seem to you?
Oh, it was great. I was really surprised, honestly, that it was so good. Like, I thought, I don't like the meta right now, and maybe the tournament will be But as it turns out, it was pretty enjoyable. I had a fun time on the couch, you know, not being in Warsaw and just being stuck at home instead. No, it was great, really.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people watched it from home. In fact, I would say that everybody watched it from home. So you weren't alone. You had a lot of people joining you, I'm sure, in the chat. Mogwai and I do check the chat from time to time when we are off duty, when we're watching one of the other sets that's going on. Mogwai and I got a chance to we cast some pretty good ones. We cast JJ versus Colamine. We'll talk all about that one for sure. We casted Adzakov versus Hanachan, and then again we cast JJ versus Game King, and finally the finals, which we'll talk about that. We'll do this in chronological order, so even if you don't know the results, we will be spoiling it. We will be talking about it. It is sports, so that kind of stuff does happen. But before we get into that, just want to let you know that this episode of Commander's Horn is recorded live. So live. It's recorded on Twitch. It's like the livest one we've ever done. Recorded on Twitch on my channel, twitch.tv/McBearded. You can find all episodes of Commander's Horn at commandershorn.com. And you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and other podcasting apps. Send your emails to commandershornpodcast@gmail.com or tweet at us at Commander's Horn. And this week's episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Mahaka Magazine for Men, where humans can lust after dwarven ladyfolk. But jokes and fakes ads aside, this episode, you got a little facepalm there. This episode is brought to you by our commandos, our patrons at patreon.com/commandershorn. Thanks so much for your support, keeping the mics on in the podcast legitimately ad-free. But there's some stuff to talk about for sure. So we're going to talk about Gwent Open. We're going to talk about the faction battle, and of course we're going to talk maybe a little bit about what you might be expecting in a meta where Nilfgaard and Monsters are on top, and we'll be talking about that right after this. The first major event for Gwent in 2018 occurred last weekend in Warsaw, live from the Gwent Tavern at CD Projekt Red Studios, where 2 tickets for the next Gwent Challenger were given out to the finalists, and we continue traveling down the road to Gwent Masters. We're talking about Gwent Open number 3, in the heart of a meta in which lots of stuff has occurred for Gwent. There's been some bugs, there's been some issues, there has been a meta dominated by dwarves and Scoia'tael in general, but none of that seemed to matter in the weekend. It's as if all of those things were put on hold, and we got one hell of a tournament. So we will be spoiling the results of the tournament. If you haven't seen the tournament, check the VODs at twitch.tv/cdprojectred, where you can watch, the beautiful faces of Mogwai and I, Merchant and Panda, casting games with 8 great players. Really cool stories for all the players at this point. But we will be discussing this in chronological order, so maybe you can kind of come along with us. And if you haven't watched it and you didn't have the time to watch it, you can hear the results as they unfold. But just generally, the tournament in general, we just talked about it. We liked it. I hope the chat also enjoyed it. But I mean, we could start it off, like, first of all, Mogwai, the general atmosphere about the tournament, it didn't feel too different. Gwent Open #1 was done kind of remotely from Gamescom. We weren't all together, but we were all together for Gwent Open #2. This one felt even tighter than the last one. Would you agree, or would you disagree?
No, I agree. And I also have to agree with what Delta said earlier. I honestly, taking my position as a caster aside, as a viewer, because of the current metagame we were in, I wasn't expecting this tournament to be nearly as good as it turned out. Mm-hmm. And it, I may be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but it turned out to be like one of my favorite Gwent events ever. And there's a lot I got to say about it, basically.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Yeah.
We have a lot to talk about. Delta, one of the things that Mogwai and I talked about, and Merchant and Panda, when we saw the deck list, because we get to see the deck list a couple days in advance, they are submitted about a week or so in advance by the players. And we felt at first, and I feel like we always feel like this when we see the deck list, that there is a lack of diversity in the deck list. A lot of people brought Consume. In fact, Consume was the only Monsters deck that was brought. Henselt was the only Northern Realms deck that was brought. Skellige Nova, it was mostly Brand, but there was Gwent Croc, but it was pretty much only Skellige Nova that was brought. And then there was some variation on, a little bit of variation on Nilfgaard and some Scoia'tael, but Scoia'tael was mostly banned. We thought it was going to be a very kind of homogenous tournament. It didn't really feel like that. But Delta, how did it feel from an observer's point of view? Did you feel like the games were very diverse?
Yeah, the games were very diverse. I mean, except JJ games. I must say, from a competitive point of view, you knew how the best of 3, best of 5 is going to go as soon as you saw the deck lists and know, he's targeting Consume, so only those games matter, because in the end, JJ won't win the others until later. But other than that, we had some really, really great games. I especially like Shaggy's lineup, not bringing Consume at all, because I as well wouldn't have brought it, because it's just the weakest archetype, the most targetable. And which in the end led to Game King's demise, for example. Bringing Consume, not such a great choice.
Yeah, I mean, he ran against somebody who was targeting it, and Hannah-chan was targeting it a little bit too in his list, although his opponent was Adzakov, who was not bringing Consume. So I feel like he got hit a little bit there, but I think he was a little bit more prepared to deal with it. So I do think that bringing Consume, I don't know if it was a risk, but I think that it was definitely, I mean, Delta, you've been talking about this for a while, and also we were talking about Panda, like Ethna artifact compression has been a thing for a while now. Like it's a way you can combat it coming from Scoia'tael, as well as also just kind of just knowing that, when you can just solve the Necro problem, there's really no problem at all. But Mogwai, we were also talking about how weather could have actually made a spot in this tournament because no one brought any sort of clears at all. So there's two kind of schools of thought on that weather actually would have done well, or that weather was actually too slow to really get it done. Which side of the argument, Mogwai, I think I know which side of the argument you're on there, but kind of explain your case for weather, how you think it would have affected that tournament.
I honestly, no offense to anybody, but I think the second side of the argument you mentioned makes no sense. I think Erden, for example, the Erden Nova deck, that Ocean Mud build, I think that deck would have done really well in this tournament. Mm-hmm. That deck is extremely good. It's very flexible. It is powerful. And if you are not able to answer neither the proactive or the hazardous weather, it just has a very easy time winning round 1. And I think that I agree completely with Delta when he says and I was saying this all over the weekend. I was shocked by how many of these top 8 players were bringing Consume monsters. Mm-hmm. It is so vulnerable. It's such a vulnerable list. And you could clearly tell that players who stood out were the likes of Azakov and Shaggy, because they did not bring it. They knew how vulnerable it was, and they resorted to Hensel, which is still a very solid list considering the format of the tournament, because it's different from Ladder. And Ladder and Hensel, you can win the coin flip, you can lose it, and that changes a lot for that deck, right? But if you know you're going second, that deck is still very, very strong. And that's why in my opinion, we saw the semifinals that we saw. Game King made it through as he went against Islav, but Super JJ took the most by far tech against Consume. But then on top of that, you had Azakov and Shaggy in the semifinals on the other side. And guess what? They didn't bring Araka. So I think this tournament, a lot of top players will learn from it. Because it's important to know that ladder and tournaments are two very different environments.
Yeah.
And I would never, if I was a competitor, I would just never resort to a deck that is so vulnerable like that one, regardless of its ridiculous proactive capabilities. It could be shut down. Your entire deck revolves around one card, and I do feel like again, even an Axeman Herald the Crippled deck could have done well too. But, I think the brand Nova list is very solid overall. But I definitely think Oceanmon's Erden list would have been really effective this tournament.
Delta, what side of your... Yeah, go for it.
I mean, the thing just is with Consume, you knew JJ was likely to target stuff because he and Life Coach, they always train together, and we knew before that they like to target. He did it. He tried it in Challenger. If you guys remember, he tried to target Hensel, which didn't work out because he didn't meet Hensel. But it's another story, right? So, just the possibility of queuing into JJ and auto losing because you brought Consume and the greedy version, I wouldn't take that risk. Never. And in the end, it was Colemon's demise. And it was a crushing defeat of that because the deck is so linear and it is so interruptible. And every single faction can tech against it and up the win rate up to 80 or 90%, which in that case you only lose if your 5 counters happen to be at the bottom of your deck. But that didn't happen. It shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, it could have. JJ could have not drawn that well, but I mean, you're protected in so many ways of drawing what you need to stop at least 2 or 3 neckers. And Game King having Summoning Circle, allowing him to produce a 4th one, did help him. The game, it wasn't really close, Game King versus JJ, but Game King was still able to amass a pretty sizable amount of points, just getting 1 necker to stick. But that's kind of why that deck is still brought. Probably is that if you can just get one going, it's you have a chance. Colemon didn't have a chance at all. Game King had a little bit of a chance, but it wasn't. It was tough.
Right.
Yeah, it was tough going. You could see that he was frustrated a little bit, and of course there was. Well, we can go through this series by series, but basically it seems like, in the decision to bring a different monsters deck or Consume, it seems like the players like Atsakov and Shaggy just decided to not bring monsters at all. But I think that was where the decision was. Do you maybe consider bringing Weather or something else for monsters, or just not bringing it at all? So I think that's probably what the popular choice was by people who were worried about Consume getting targeted.
I think you could have brought Weather, definitely. You could have brought either the Eridan Nova list published by Oceanmon, which I think is a bit high rolly. It is draw dependent because it has a lot of ad cards as well. You can blank on Moonlights and Recons and Frosts in your opening hand, and then you just get screwed. But I mean, that's a risk you can take, and it's really good on red coin. So on the other hand, you also can choose not to bring monsters at all, which I think I would have done after all, because it isn't not much to that archetype, to the whole faction at this point. We have the Frost, and then we have a bit of Deathwish, which nobody will ever bring, and then we have Consume, which is 2 targetable, and that's basically it. So I think Shaggy and Etzikov did the right choice in the end, not choosing to bring it at all.
Monster needs some love, I think. But we can talk about the matches here. So the big one of the big matches that a lot of people are going to remember for a long time, Super JJ versus Colemon. So this this series was very unassuming for the first 3 games. Colemon goes up 2-1 to JJ on game 3. And, if from somebody who was maybe just kind of observing, it's all right, Colemon, here go, match point. JJ just has to win with his Consume deck. Unfortunately for Colemon, JJ had all the answers. We saw people weren't even ready. some people were still getting their makeup on. Like no one was ready to like go to the studio for the next thing. Coleman 2 lightning fast concedes as he was completely shut down by JJ. Mogwai, when we were casting that, did you think it was going to go down that quickly for Coleman?
No. I definitely saw the tech options, and I was very intrigued to see them, play out because on paper it looked really good, but I hadn't tried exactly like that approach, right? So I didn't know how efficient it would be, how fast it would be, and yeah, I was definitely quite shocked. But I mean, every single time Coleman forfeited, like I was not surprised in the slightest. You know what I mean? Like at that point, I was like, yeah, there's no way he can win. Like literally, like his Brand Warriors are 6 strength, his Fork Tails are 8 strength. Like it's just he's got nothing. So yeah.
I was playing Eifne Artifact Compression for a little bit on ladder when Consume was more popular. The Greedy Consume just got published, and a lot of people were playing it, and I abused the fact that they were, because I just added Isengrim Outer and Artifact Compression, and my win rate was 90%. Like, they need to have all 3 Neckers in hand, Operator, Summoning Circle, etc., etc. But and that was just with, like, 2 answers, basically. Artifact Compression and Eifne, but JJ had Muzzle and Mandrake, and he just kept adding more tech on it while still keeping a good amount of core points like Commander's Horn, etc. still were available to him, which I did like a lot. That was great.
And then after that series, so we saw Coleman forfeit with 10 cards in his hand. You will never see a best of 5 go to 5 games and be that fast. That saved us like half an hour. That saved us. We would have cast that for at least half an hour and 40 minutes, I think.
Yeah. That would have been like horrible.
Yeah. But to be fair, I want to point out that despite the ending of that matchup, I'm personally starting to believe that Coleman has the potential to become the greatest Gwent competitor out there. He is scary good. There's one thing to be good, and there's another thing to be scary fucking good. And Coleman is scary fudging. Let's keep it PG. Good. He makes very little mistakes. Sometimes he doesn't make a single mistake, and he thinks so far up ahead, and is just. I think he would be a nightmare to compete against, and we saw this in the Challenger. He kind of messed up in the finals against Freddy, but his 2 games prior to that against Shaggy and Tilbot, he was sublime. So like good. He's amazing, and looking back at JJ's entire run, he was the closest guy. He was the only guy who got 2 wins on JJ. He got 1 more win than Asakov when he himself was running Consume Monsters, right? So it's like I think out of the 2, nothing against, I think JJ is one of the best players in the world, but I do think Coleman impressed me more with his gameplay. It's just that JJ had the answers, but Coleman is like.
I agree.
I think he will be the best. If he keeps it up like this, I think he will be the #1 player in the world.
In terms of like top 5 players worldwide, I think on the pro ladder, I think Coleman and Mega would be like my #1 spot. We don't know how Mega would perform in the tournament, but he's also just a beast. And like I've been playing him since closed beta and earlier, and that guy is also insane. He doesn't do any mistakes. You won't find any weakness. If you don't win the coin flip and have like the perfect hand, you won't win. And that's just
it's
super fucking scary. And Coleman is just the same. Those are like the homegrown Gwent talents I would really like to see like at Gwent Masters.
Yeah, Gwent Masters is going to be. Oh man, I don't even know. That's still almost a year, if not a year away. That's Gwent Masters, I believe, is scheduled for January of 2019. Because I think there will be a Challenger in December. I'm not really sure. I think the calendar is getting revised. Some people were talking about the Challenger in the U.S. coming up, and that's actually probably not the location that it's going to be in. So stay tuned for updates to that. Game King versus Sloth was a really close series as well. Game King was able to take Sloth out 3-1. No, that also went to 5 games, and that one was it was an interesting one because we at the very end, Game King was up like 70 points, and we're just like, yeah, we should probably go. We didn't know who was going to win that one for sure because we had to travel back to the studio to get ready to cast the follow-up game of Adscott versus Hannah-chan. But Delta, what did you think about this series? It was a really good close series, I thought.
It was a really close series, but I was really disappointed by Sloth because, like, in multiple games he missed stuff. Let me put it this way. It wasn't really a mistake. Like, I can totally understand the way he played, but he missed crucial stuff which would have led him to win the game, especially in the Usurper. I don't know if you guys catch that or not. The Usurper spy matchup versus Consume.
Roach?
No, not Roach. No. That was bad. But there was an even earlier part, which was like a little bit more tricky. He could have used Sire to completely block Brewers and Slizzards from pulling Neckers. There were only 2 Neckers in Game King's graveyard at this point, and he didn't put them back in. He decided to try and block the Phoenix instead. So upward was
with the putting the Forktail and the Slizzard.
Yeah.
Right?
You're talking about the second match, right? Yeah.
The second match, and that was really like disappointing because that would have won him the game for sure. Because then only 1 Necker would have come out via ADC, and we knew he hit the Usurper into Radovid, so that was a clear win. And I was like, I was really sad that he missed that opportunity because he was really trying to using a Sire offensively, but he decided to go for the Phoenix block, which is like impossible if there are like 2 Slizzards and like 1 Forktail and 1 Ran in the graveyard. So you deny a few points there, but he could have denied the whole combo and Brewers as well. So it's bad.
And how about Sloth bringing Usurper and actually rolling Radovid 2 out of the 3 times and getting Aridin on the other time, which is also a really good outcome for Usurper.
Usurper is great. Usurper is like the best create leader in the game.
Yeah, he's
simply
really good.
Because he's a spy. He's a spy, and that just makes him so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mogwai, go for it.
Well, first of all, I want to say that that series was personally my second favorite series of the entire tournament. There, as Delta pointed out, there were slight mistakes, but I think it's very hard to not make those mistakes, even if you are at the very high level. That's why I go back to saying how scary Coleman is, because he seems like a damn robot. He just doesn't.
It's like he's seeing what we're seeing, right? He's seeing both hands, is what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but the thing is, despite that, that was my second favorite series because it was just so tight, so competitive, so intense, and so thrilling to watch. I cry every time because Nilfgaard lost a lot in those games. If I remember correctly, it was Game King bringing his Emir while Sloth led off with the Rockus Queen. Both players got the Rockus Queen win in the matchup against Nilfgaard at the beginning. But one of my favorite matches in the entire tournament was that last game, Usurper versus Emir. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I thought that was super exciting. And if I remember correctly, ended up only with a 5-point gap. Was it like 91 to 96? It was super close. And Sloth did. It was also very dramatic because Sloth did pull Roach through Joaquin.
Yeah, that's never good.
And that actually cost him the game. Yeah, that cost him the game. But it was so intense. And it was very nice seeing the Usurper. But I also want to point out that there was obviously his Twitch chat, right? But I do want to get this off my chest. There was a lot of RNG. I'm sorry, if I'm not going PG here, but a lot of RNG bitching in the chat. A lot of people just saying, RNG. It's like, come on. It's not like he's jog-sailing people with the Usurper. Usurper's a fine leader. Like yes, the create mechanic is sometimes going to give you, but it's not breaking the game. Like it made it exciting. When I was watching that series, I was just thinking, what is he going to do with Usurper? What options is he going to have? What is he going to go for? Because you also have to adapt to the list you have in front of you, right? So. I thought it was really cool. I love seeing the Usurper, and I think other players didn't bring the Usurper because they feared, the high rolly aspect of it. But mathematically speaking, it's Emir's very safe and he's very good always. But the Usurper, and obviously, like I understand running Emir, especially if you're running Kahir, like Azakov and Game King did. But overall, I think the Usurper, mathematically speaking, is very, very powerful, and I don't know, I like him a lot, and I like the fact that Sloth brought him.
I thought that bringing Usurper was very cool. I mean, there's 2 schools of thought, right? You want to see people maybe punished for bringing RNG for like looking at like a dead Ethna, like Bran, and like there's like 4 or 5 leaders that you never want to see, and you could get a big clump of them. It's not statistically likely that you're going to get 3 leaders that are all terrible, but it is possible to get that. But getting Radovid when you can lock the 2 long shifts, like that was pretty good. And Aridin's like still like good value. Even like just producing a Wild Hunt Warrior is usually pretty good. Even if it's like out of faction, not a lot of synergy.
To kill a spy too.
Yeah, you can kill. Yeah, you get the spy as well, and you can kill spies, and I don't know, it's pretty cool. It was really awesome that he brought it. I think that, and he was the only player that saw that as being like a super viable thing to do. And then we have Adzakov versus Hannah-chan. Hannah-chan actually bringing Alchemy Nilfgaard and up against Adzakov. Now there's a couple of things to talk about in this matchup as well. The main one was Adzakov throwing the game. The one game that he lost, he threw the game. He had 2 chances to win it. Well, sorry, he had 2 chances to not lose it, let's say. One chance to win it if he lined up for Commander's Horn, and then another chance to tie it if he just put the unit on the row that he wanted to play Commander's Horn. But it's as if he didn't even see that he had Commander's Horn in his hand anymore. It was for a high-level tournament, a surprising play. Delta, what did you think about this?
Like, watching it from home, like, the moment he placed on the Shani in the front row, people in Discord were already going crazy. Like, why is he placing that? Shouldn't he be placing that in the back row? And everyone was like, keep calm, he knows what he's doing. And he was, like, placing again in the front row, destroying the Commander's Horn row, completely not going for the tie. And then his eyes, when he realized that, he was just like, and everyone else was, why? Yeah, I mean, it's a stage, and sometimes you just fuck up. It happens. I don't know.
It happens to everybody. It happens to even the #1 player in the pro ladder. Like, people need to understand that. Like, it's so easy to mess up like that in a way, especially because a lot of times those sort of mistakes happen because your mind is thinking about something else up ahead in the game, or you're just occupied with something, and all of a sudden you kind of like translate that thought over to your current play, and you all of a sudden you're like, why? Oh no, I was thinking about something else, and I'm placing this here, but no, I should have. Like, I was talking with him, and I don't remember exactly what he was, but he was thinking about something else, and that's why he placed the golem on top. But he realized immediately after doing it. It happens. As a caster, it was it was kind of like, well, I'm sorry guys, but he just threw the game.
Really
That's just what he did.
Yeah, it's a really hard decision. Like, how hard do you go? Like, as a caster, how hard do you go on this player? Like, do you say, oh no, he did completely fuck this game up now? Yeah. You're like, well,
I mean, at the time,
this happened.
At the time, it was hard because the narrative around Adzakov, of course, is that he hadn't gotten out of the quarterfinals. So it was like, if that was what kept him out of the quarterfinals, it's like you have no one to blame but yourself. So there was that story that could have come out of it, but then he got himself together, he got in the zone, he was bopping his head around, and then all of a sudden he just shut it down. And Adzakov did advance. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was, first of all, Hannah-chan's play in that matchup where he actually was able to, he rolled the Guardian from the Runestone and then played the offensive Vilgefortz, causing Adzakov to draw the near worthless Golem. It looked great, except for the fact that it wouldn't have mattered if Adzakov had just played into the Commander's Horn. But, hey, what do you want to say? But the other thing was that Hannah-chan was also bringing Alchemy Nilfgaard competitively, which was good. The only player that brought non-Spy Nilfgaard. Mogwai, what do you think about Alchemy versus Spy at this level of play?
It's hard to say because Spy Nilfgaard is extremely efficient. It's just a very strong deck. The snowball's much higher than Alchemy. What I like about Alchemy, though, is its flexibility. And the reason I think Hannah-chan brought it is because he wanted to have a good... It's actually really efficient against Consume because you can utilize Mandrake first to eliminate a Necker, and then you can Azir the Mandrake back and you replay it with Vesemir later down the line. What's really cool about Alchemy Nilfgaard is its ability to really invest hard into the late game with Mandraking your John Calvate and getting that. I love the Kahir into John Calvate into Vilgefortz combo. It is ridiculously strong, especially if you buffed up that John Calvate. And obviously, a really cool aspect of that deck is the Viper Skull Witcher. It gives you a very good control mechanic. I don't know. I don't think it's at the power level of Spy Nilfgaard, but it's a very powerful deck regardless, and it was cool to see some diversity in that sense. I don't know exactly why he went for it, barring that, because Spy Nilfgaard can also be good against Consume with Sweers, but it's definitely it was cool. I definitely appreciate it. As a Nilfgaard main, I love seeing diversity. Like, it's not all about spies. There's other decks, so I liked it.
Delta, anything to add about Alchemy versus Spies? Coming from
reason why I think the reason why Spies is better is very simple. You can add like Cantarella and Summoning Circle to that deck without like giving up too much of your silver power, which you need in Alchemy because you need to fill in Mandrake, etc. And like the Spy game is so important at high
Yeah.
level of
Yeah, it is.
and giving that up is critical.
Fair
I
enough.
think, because drawing Silver Spy and Summoning Circle in your opening hand, especially on red coin, is almost game winning in some scenarios. If your opponent didn't draw a Spy, you can put him out of round 1 immediately. And Spies have just a great synergy as well. So the deck works so good, and the buff to Enforcer helped it a lot as well. You can align perfect Ignis, etc., etc. It's just, Alchemy still feels a little bit rough. It got a lot of new tools in this patch, but it still lags in certain areas. I think we need better golds as well. Like, we can't use Rain Fund, we can't use Mana, etc. Like real power bomb golds. We have to use Trials, which is like vulnerable. Wilgefortz, of course, is good, but Vesemir feels, I don't know, 4 points.
I like Vesemir a lot, actually, in Nilfgaard list personally, but I think that I mean, when you're looking at it, like Alchemy is a really good, like Alchemy is a fun ladder deck that you can get pretty far with, but I think like in a competitive, from a competitive standpoint, it may just not really add up to the Spies. But props to Hanachan for bringing it. I thought that was pretty cool that he brought it. Allowed for a little bit more diversity in the list that we saw. And finally, we had Shaggy versus Shamel, and this was a dominating performance by Shaggy. He was able to 3-0 Shamel. Shamel maybe felt a little bit of the pressure of being on the big stage. It was his first trip from outside of Russia. I think he had a lot of support, though. We did see Melee Man play in Gwent Slam. He was invited to that. Also, when Melee Man was at Gwent Slam, he trained with Shamel. So, you know, these players talk to each other a lot. And I think it was too bad. I wanted Shamel to maybe do a little bit better there. I mean, Shaggy's a really tough opponent, but going home on the 3-0 is unfortunate. Hopefully, it's not the last time we see it. We know Shamel has like kind of doubled down on putting efforts into playing Gwent. He's been playing Gwent since the closed beta. He's been known for playing Gwent at a very high level for basically as long as you can know anybody for doing that. And if players don't understand that or know that, you know, people like in the chat or whatever, Shamel's been a great player for a really long time. So don't count him out at all, and don't let that performance sway you. He's a fantastic player. But overall in the tournament, though, Shaggy just really had just kind of a death grip on him for pretty much that whole thing. He made a couple of plays that Shamel made a couple of plays that had him shaking his head into the camera. But generally, though, Mogwai, how did you feel about this matchup?
Again, wanna jump on that. I'm having a bit of trouble with English here. Basically, I wanna repeat what you said regarding Shamel. Like, it's very easy to disregard him. It's very easy to criticize him. He was one of the top 8 players in the pro ladder. He made it. He definitely deserved to be there. But I do have to say that series was a prior example of just one player being clearly superior to the other, and that's just how it is. Shaggy was just dominant. He was just better. He won there were very different matchups, and no matter what the matchup was, he won it. Even the last one, which I think was personally my favorite, the King Bran against Arrakis Queen. That was a beautiful game, and Shaggy just outplayed him every single time. When he dropped that Siri Nova round 1, everybody was like losing their minds. What is he doing? Oh, he's dropping his win condition. He's like, no, in this matchup, who's your Nova? Igni is your Nova, not Siri. So it's like the fact that he acknowledged exactly how far he needed to push, the fact that he just knew exactly how to beat him in every matchup. I think it's just one of those cases in which he has his number. He told me the day prior how he went like 7-0 against him in the pro ladder. So
yeah,
he's like I said, Shamel is a very strong player and one of the best out there to be able to qualify for the Open. But Shaggy's a monster, and as of right now, you know, Shaggy, in my eyes, is just a better player. And Shaggy had overall an outstanding performance in the Gwent Open, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, Shaggy did really well. He did really well, and his series with Atsukov was also very good. But yeah, he was able to take it down. Delta, if you have any notes on the Shaggy versus Shamel there, if you had a chance to, I think that was the one matchup that you maybe have missed, but I don't know if you caught up with it at all.
I watched them. Yeah, I caught up on it, and I just saw Shaggy kicking ass, and I wasn't surprised. Like, Shaggy is really good. He's not on Colemon's level for me, but like when I met him at the Gamescom and we were talking about his games, etc., and I got a feeling like Shaggy is going to be there all the time for the game. He is such a good player, and
He's a good player.
he's very proficient. I mean, he sometimes low rolls for no reason. I think he should learn how to draw better, honestly. Like, that's his biggest mistake.
Learn how to draw better. Yeah.
10 out of 10 advice.
The best advice you could probably give anybody. Just draw your good cards. Try that.
Try not losing coin flip is also my best advice to like anyone who wants to climb to Grandmaster. Like, just try and win coin flips like 5 times in a row, and you will get there. It's not that hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough. I mean, as long as the cutoff is at 8, I think it's always going to be really hard. But it's true. I mean, I would have loved to see Shamel win his Skellige game at least, because one of the earliest memories that I have of Shamel is a guy who, I mean, it's weird to say this, and I've said this before in the podcast, I think a guy who basically kind of pioneered the open pass. Like, it's just one of the things that he was known for doing. He would play, you'd open pass, or you just play spy pass, or like Skellige used to have 2 spies, so it was just all about getting to round 3 and having a long round 3, because Skellige was better in round 3, and it was just like common sense, right? But he was just really, really good at that, and a lot of players from that time recognized him as like a god of Skellige at the time. So it would have been cool to see Shamel win a Skellige game in that, but he did get 3 out, unfortunately. And then that brings us to the semis. Super JJ versus Game King. This is how we led off the Sunday matches. It was tough for Game King. Game King did have his consume kicked around a bit because Super JJ was ready for consume. But on top of that, Game King also made a critical misplay in the very first game. He's playing Nilfgaard. Super JJ is playing monsters. And Game King checks the graveyard, and he checks the graveyard again, and he checks the graveyard again, and then he plays Vikavara Medic into nothing, and he goes down an extra card against JJ, and that was certain death. Delta, what did you think about this watching it?
I could hear like Mogwai nearly face palming, like he was taking a look at it and was just like, yeah. I mean, there's not much to say about it. It's basically like the same mistakes Sloth did. It's just nerfs, and then I also have this, right? When you're like playing Gwent a lot, and then you get into a routine, and at some point you just do a really, really fucking dumb mistake. And then you just, in a normal game, you just like escape and enter and hope the other guy forgets who your name was and never talks to you again. This is on a stage. And then it even gets worse. But like at that point you're just like caught in this moment, and you can't concede. This would be too much. So you just like pretend nothing happened. Or you just go hit yourself. I don't know. I would probably start hitting myself if I did that.
I mean, he definitely put his hands in his. He put his face in his hands at the end of that one.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, a loss is a loss. It's just kind of like what happened with Adzikov. It's like, okay, well, I lost that game. Let's move on to the next one. I think that he was ready to do that. I mean, these players, if you get tilted, it's Gwent's a tough game to play if you get really, really tilted, especially if it's your own mistakes. Because you have a lot of opportunities to dwell on mistakes in Gwent. Since the games, even if you mess up, it's not like you mess up and then your opponent can just, to quote Hearthstone, go face and end the game or whatever. If you make a mistake, the game ends fast. The game ends just as slowly as it was going to end anyway. It's just you have to kind of just like live and like wallow in that mistake. So it was too bad that Game King had to go down a card there, and then ultimately JJ's targeting paid off. Game King was not able to get a win with Consume, and in the mirror, even though Game King was able to amass like something like 156 points in the last round, JJ had over 200, and it was more. And he was just able to execute his strategy with more Consume effects, and that was that. I don't know, Mogwai, you were there. It didn't look too good for Game King there, did it?
I think also in a way, I don't like saying this, but I think Rafael was a little bit mentally defeated going to that match because it's just the reality. You could see it. He wasn't like I've seen him with like way more like fire in his eyes. Like in that game he was just kind of like really. He knew the odds were against him. He was very aware of it, and that I spoke to him after the game, regarding the Vikavaro misplay, and it was exactly that. He just it's when your mind is building up a sequence, and he just he basically his brain convinced himself that he had killed the emissary with the enforcer, which is what he should have done, but he just didn't do it initially. And he just thought he did it for some weird reason, and he went for it, and it happens. Like I said, nerves, a bunch of different factors go into it, right? We humans are not machines, it happens. So
we're not all
it's a streamer mistake. It's like a streamer mistake.
Exactly.
You guys do those a lot, and then we in chat laugh at you and ha 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 ha. But at the end, it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
streamer madness, I call it. You get, you're reading your chat. You just kind of, you're looking at the screen, but you just don't see the things that are on the screen. It's like super weird.
You just
thing
play
that can
Gwent
happen.
and it's all like green and like you see a blue coin over there and you're like,
Yeah, exactly.
And that is why, eventually machines will overtake us and we will go extinct.
Oh,
It's just
Yeah, we'll just watch machines
regard-
play Gwent. Bots, the bot league.
So overall, that series, I think JJ was very dominant. I did really like Game King's second game, in which he won with, I believe it was Emir Spies. I think he played really well that game. He really brought it to him. But then JJ was just overall a bit dominant and is 2-0 against Game King in tournaments. Game King really has to step it up to defeat JJ, as right now he definitely has his number. And I hope, that motivates him to, get to work and overcome the German. As, like I said, it was pretty much what everybody expected, but it didn't turn out, like the games didn't turn out as people were expecting, because it didn't end up coming, like we only saw the Iraq as mirror. The rest of the games didn't revolve around consume matchups, really. It was just JJ kind of outplaying Game King a little bit, I think.
Yeah, because it ended up like Game King he wanted, it was interesting because a lot of people were talking about how, we were talking about it as well. So JJ had, Super JJ had the red coin in that situation, so he was going second in games 1, 3, and 5. So I was thinking, going first on the red coin, you're likely to lead off with Henselt, but Henselt was Game King's best matchup for Consume. He's most likely to get a win with Consume against Henselt. But playing Consume on the blue coin was risky, especially when you have Bran and you have Nilfgaard, which are much better blue coin decks. So like, how do you play that? And both players knew the deck list, they knew what was going on. Game King didn't even. Side note, we'll talk about it later. JJ never had Scoia'tael banned, which is really interesting. But it was super interesting. So Game King had an opportunity to lead off with Consume, and he ultimately didn't. He led off with Nilfgaard. But I wonder how that series would have gone if Game King led off with Consume instead.
That was the weak point, like JJ's whole lineup there. Henselt, this can, even with Villeneuve and Scorch, can totally be beaten by greedy Consume lists. It's very possible. Like, if he doesn't draw all the perfect key cards and you push him enough in round 1, then Consume can definitely win this matchup. So I was very surprised that Game King didn't decide to queue up Consume until he hits Henselt. So this is a bit meh speaking, but it's also a bit about a money point, of course, because he knew the other matchups could go more in his way. But for me personally, if I were shooting for the top and the win, I would have queued up Consume first, just hoping to hit that Henselt matchup. And if I win that, then I can as well take the series. Because the Henselt was the weak link in the whole lineup. There was no artifact compression, no Mandrake, nothing to banish Neckers. Yeah, you can kill them, but you can also prevent that. It's bit tricky, but it's possible.
Yeah, he was running the reinforced ballista, so at least he had a lot of like ping potential. But the Nilfgaard matchup against Henselt is also really good. Like, you can kind of disrupt crewmen with spies and stuff. So it's Game King was going for maybe as many wins as possible, but playing for the ticket, I wonder how it would have gone in a different situation, because if Game King got his win with Consume, it kind of changes the entire trajectory of the matchup. Although we know that JJ was able to perform well against a list that wasn't running Consume at all. We'll get to that though. Second semifinals, Shaggy versus Adzikov. This series was really tight. Shaggy was down. Shaggy was up. Shaggy was down 2-0, and then mounted a reverse sweep, got all the way to game 5, and it was really, really close pretty much the whole way down. All the games were really close and intense. Mogwai and I, we thought that Adzikov had the potential to go 3-0, so we were getting ready to go for the show match and then ultimately the finals. And we had left the viewing area early because we said to ourselves, okay, well, if Adzikov drops Taller here, he's probably going to win the game. And he drew Taller, and we're like, all right, let's get up and get ready to go. And then ultimately Shaggy ended up winning that game, and then the following game as well. And it was a pretty close series though. Delta, what did you think about this series?
The last matchup, like Henselt versus Henselt, first of all, that matchup is so horrible to play. But the whole game I was rooting for Shaggy just to show I was like, yes, you can beat the handheld mirror on blue coin. But it just wasn't good enough. It's also because the handset lists were very different. Like Atsikos was way more aggressive, while Shaggy had like towers, etc. And then the top decks in 1-3 were also a bit on the unlucky side for Shaggy, and I was like,
Yeah.
Damn it, Shaggy, I told you. Draw better.
What about Shaggy bringing Kedweni siege supports in his Henselt list to counter Nilfgaard spies? Mogwai, what did you think about that? We talked to Seb, CDPR Moonlight. He loved this. He was like telling us like, buy Shaggy a beer for bringing this list. Mogwai, what did you think about this one? This is pretty good.
Well, right? Yeah, I mean, before I jump into that, I just want to say that this was my favorite series of the entire tournament, personally.
It was good.
I think both players performed extremely well, and it was like, honestly, like one of the best examples of competitive Gwent in my eyes. It was just really good. Very few mistakes made on both sides, in my opinion, and just super intense, and it ended up in a very, very close last game, in which I do think Delta's right. I think Azakov's I love Azakov's using of ballistas, especially against Henselt, can just in a lot of matchups just are absolute nukes. And I don't know, I was a huge fan of the games, and I was like, it was very exciting when Shaggy was pulling that reverse sweep, like especially after that clutch win in the third game, in which we were like watching it in the car outside, because we were, you know, we were
watching it in a car basically. We had a car that would shuttle us from door to door because it was cold, and it was like a kind of a fairly long walk. Fairly long. When you got to get there fast, it was long.
Yep.
Not used to cold weather, I see.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, come
on.
It's like 2 minutes door to door if you walk, which is like a long time when you need to get there, right? So it's,
exactly.
Yeah, it was cool. We had and they were like blasting the Witcher music in the car. It was really cool.
Yeah, it was nice. But yeah, as I was saying, like regarding the siege supports, I like it. I liked it a lot. Because at first we were looking over the deck list the day prior, and we didn't understand it. Like, well, why is he running siege supports? There's not really much muster synergy going on here at all. But then in the matchup against Smell, especially, like, it was just beautiful to see. But it's also a big testament to Azakov, because Azakov really impressed me in those first two games against Shaggy. I think he played really well and really took it to him, and was also able to, like, when I started seeing Henselt losing on red coin so much, I was getting very impressed, because you have to be a very good player to be able to do that.
Yes.
You have to know when to pass. You have to know how much you need to get out of him. Like, it's tricky. Playing against Henselt in general can be quite tricky. And playing Henselt itself, which I think was, and I mean, Azakov did confirm this, it was his weak game. Like, it was the weakest part by far of his game, as he hadn't played many games with it. So, I don't know. I like this series a lot, and I love that tech personally. It was really cool.
Yeah. Finally, Super JJ versus Adzakov for all the money. Well, not all the money, the most of the money. Both players got tickets to the Challenger at that point. Super JJ and Adzakov will be at the Challenger. That'll be coming up in April, I believe. Well, again, there's going to be probably a calendar update, but stay tuned to that at Gwent Masters. And Super JJ versus Adzakov was very interesting. The narrative here was that Super JJ had a consume targeted list. Adzakov was not running consume. However, unlike when Super JJ targeted Mill and didn't see it, and then targeted Weather and then didn't see it, JJ's lists were still good enough to like still really push for the win. So even though you're running like, you know, an extra Mandrake and Scoia'tael, which again wasn't banned in this situation, or, you know, you have muzzles, your muzzles are still going to get use. You're still going to get use out of your cards that you have that specialize against the consume targeting, but are still good cards. They're not just like 9-point bronzes that are not clearing Weather, or whatever you want, or like 40 card weird lists, like 40 card lists that can't be milled, that draw badly. So it's not, this time JJ the targeting was definitely in his favor, and Adzakov, he put up a good fight, I thought, and the last game was so good because Adzakov was able to pull 5 battering rams with Henselt for a play that was just short of what he needed. He needed something like 60 points. It was like 56 or 55 points. That play was so crazy. Consume is just, when Consume can get the strategy going, I mean, people brought Consume because it was that good. But, you know, if you can't really answer consume, it's almost approaching binary deck status. I don't know if either of you agree with me. Delta, do you agree that consume is like you have the answer or you lose? Like it's kind of like the way mill used to be?
It's really horrible. Like if you're on ladder and you queue into consume and you're like, I did not happen to draw my Shiro in this matchup. And then you're like, oh, seems like I'm going to lose. Ooh.
Yeah, it can happen.
I don't like decks which just check for answers. This like reminds me back of like after close beta when weather was like super overpowered and like you happen to, if you remember, Frost dealt 1 damage to everything on the row. It was like against X-Men. It was just checking for answers. Do you have this? Yes, no. Okay, you win the game. Next. We saw this in the Colemon games. Like Colemon basically just checked. Did JJ have all his answers? Yes, he did. Okay, go next. I don't really like this. Gwent has so much potential to be a very strategic game like chess, and it shouldn't be just like, I don't know, a pitbull fight.
I mean, it seems like that sometimes. Like you can have a deck that's just needs this very, very specific answer, and I think that they're trying to change the game to avoid that. And we saw Mill lose some tools, so like Mill isn't quite like that anymore. Like a deck that demands that you play just differently from every other game that you would play. But I think the consume is generally if you can push consume all the way down in round 2, you have a chance. And we saw Colemon actually do that against JJ in the first series, I believe, or it did happen at some point in the tournament. You just push consume all the way down to when they have to expend all their resources, and then they have a bad draw in round 3, and that's it. And that's how I play on the ladder. But if it's still though, like it's really hard to beat them in round 1 sometimes because they have so many extra resources they can use to cycle neckers and generate points. That's how I felt about it. But I think that the series itself was really, really close. All of those games, Mogwai, those games were like 3-4 points apart at the very beginning there.
And actually, like JJ could have 3-0'd this. Like he did a crucial mistake in the Nilfgaard versus Consume matchup. He had his Mandrake in hand for far too long. I don't know if you guys remember this, but like he muzzled the first Imperial Brigade, so he took out 1 engine, and then Arzikov just played his next engine after that. And at this point, he should have just played the Mandrake. He kept it until the very end for a 14-point play on an Imperial Brigade. Yeah. If he used that on the Enforcer, he would have had like 22 and even more points, and then he would have won that game as well. Yeah.
It's difficult though to like call like once you reach that point. I'm pretty sure when he played that, it's obviously when he played that Mandrake, he's like, I definitely kept this too long, but it's hard to make that decision ultimately. Like a lot of times you don't realize how much damage an Enforcer is gonna do until you've taken all the hits. Something I want to say though about like about that series in general is that it showed that I think JJ's tech was so good that it went beyond consume monsters. Like if you think about it, his tech works just as well against Hensel. It's just as efficient against Hensel. Muzzle with muzzle with artifact compression from Ethne. With there's so many things at Mandrake as well, because all of his machines, ballista, battering ram, like because especially because Azikov's list, because he wasn't running reinforced ballista. If he was running reinforced ballista, it would have been a little bit easier for him. But because he was running ballista and battering ram and siege master, all those units have 6 base strength, which means that Mandrake wipes them out in 1 hit. So all this tech that you're running for a deck in consume monsters also happens to be extremely effective against Hensel. So that's something that I failed to see at first because I had Azikov favored in that matchup, but then when when that
went on,
I started looking at him, I'm like, oh wow,
and then we were like so disappointed when JJ didn't completely shut him down, and actually the Nanaki combo worked out in the end, and I was like, no, don't artifact compression one with don't do
as a caster though, and as a spectator, I got excited when that happened though, because I'm like, I'm gonna see so many battered rams. This is like a wet dream. Come on.
That very moment, like JJ's heart must have dropped so much. Like when the second battering ram came out, and he was just like, ooh,
yeah,
shit,
because the artifact compression When he played that artifact impression, he was playing around something else, and we talked about it right after the game. It was something like if he, it was,
I don't know if.
Yeah, it was Villain Treadmirth. So
Villain Treadmirth. Yeah.
Because Nenneke would have protected the row from Villain Treadmirth, I think, and I think that was just because he would have had to have played it. It was something like that, but it wasn't a sure thing. And then the extra battering ram was like, ooh, this could actually be enough. This could actually be the play that's crazy enough to beat me. But I think it was because there weren't enough good targets for the battering ram. If the battering rams all had like targets to chain the damage, it would have been enough. But there was only like 2 1-strength units on the board, and then everything else just had to get fed into like the larger units that were on the board.
Yeah. That's why rams are not that good against
five battering rams. I think it was like that's pretty good. That's exactly kind of what I wanted to see, but I wanted to see it in like a blaze of glory, but unfortunately, it's still. I think it was still intense. Like Mogwai and I, like we've done a lot of casts where things are happening on the screen. It's like, oh, what's gonna happen? Here we go. You know, like the very famous 1 spider, 2 spider from Mogwai. But in this situation, we were dead silent. We were just watching the ram, boom, 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 just like counting,
awesome.
just counting in our heads. And I hope that like translated really well in the cast, because like we were both just like. Like you couldn't see our faces, but we were like over the screen, like
I was freaking out because I was like, you can't underestimate the burst of this play. Like it's just 50. I saw the 50 points. Like the only reason why I was unsure is because all the units were so beefed up, so there was no real room for the battering rams. But if there were more low strength units, he would have overcome that. Like it was a really nice way to end the tournament. It was very dramatic,
it was
very intense.
Yeah,
very dramatic, and it's like something Gwent always has struggled with. Like back in close beta, when tournaments happened, like a lot of pro players always said that you could see who wins just from the opening hand, and this has changed now with Create coming in, for example, and like, but also with the rest how the game has changed. It's like a little bit more. There's a little bit more behind it now, and I really get that excitement now, which I get in other esports games, and that's great. That's good for the game.
2 more things I want to talk about quickly about Gwent Open. One of them was about Scoia'tael not being 100% banned. In that JJ only had Nilfgaard banned, never had Scoia'tael banned, even though both of those decks, I mean, obviously people thought if he's targeting Consume, he's running Swears, so I want to ban Nilfgaard, but Scoia'tael has like almost enough, if not maybe more options to shut down Consume. But even after knowing that, none of the players banned Scoia'tael. Where do you think the players were coming from not banning JJ Scoia'tael? Were they not threatened by the Farseer Dragoon combo? Did they not think that it was an optimal Scoia'tael list? Where do you think people were coming from on that one? I'll pitch this one to Mogwai first.
I find it very intriguing because I, as a spy player, I know how strong that deck is, but at the same time, that deck, unlike Dwarves, relies on engines, right? So it's way more disruptible. You can actually tech against it. Freddy Babes proved this in the prior Challenger, and it is a deck that can be defeated if you like. I don't know. It has weaknesses. I look at Dwarves and I just don't see any weaknesses. It's a deck that just plays very mid-rangey. It's just agitator into skirmisher, this and that, points. And I was talking this with Coleman actually on the ride to the airport. Like we were in the same cab. And the reason why Dwarves is able to like not rely on engines like it does is because of its golds. It's because once the match drags out and the engines are starting to snowball, there comes Ithlane.
Yeah.
There comes Yorveth Meditation. Like that. So all these things combined make that sort of deck so powerful that I honestly was surprised to not see it banned every single time. Personally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Big mistake.
We were talking.
It came back on them. Like the Atikov game, King Branch versus Eifne, like there was no special tech involved. It was just a good dwarf hand, and he just beat him. It was Commander's Horn, Eifne Commander's Horn, Pauli, Hattori, just points, and he couldn't beat it. Like it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But then there was also the game where JJ had his graveyard completely denied, and he actually couldn't win. He got 2-0'd. I think that was one of the games that Coleman won, right? I think he denied Hattori and. Yeah.
That was because JJ, I think no, it was Game King. It was Game King who just kept pushing round 2 all the time until he like got them down to Hattori and Pauli, and then But it's JJ's fault because he ran Dragoons, which I do not agree with. Like, I don't think Dragoons are the correct choice for a deck like this. They are engines, they can be disrupted, they are too slow. And just play Scouts instead and high roll Dragoon if you need one. But, I know. But, this
guy... I agree. I think...
He had, like, has played a Scout round 1, for example, instead, and his Hattori would have had the target, and he would have won that game. And that's basically all it is about. Like, he was, I don't know, 15 points down with a 4-point Hattori and a 7-point Pauli in hand, which wasn't enough because they both had targets. But if they had targets, he would won the game.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the last thing to talk about was the show match, because this is going to segue into our faction challenge discussion, which will be just near the end of the podcast here. But the show match, MegaMogwai taking on Impetuous Panda. Your first and last names. This was a ton of fun, I think, for everybody involved. I think Mogwai, maybe you had the least fun because you lost the show match, but it was a great way to kick off the faction challenge that we're currently embroiled in, Monsters versus Nilfgaard. But basically, Merchant and I got to cast Mogwai and Panda and really barely talk about the games and just basically try to make fun of Mogwai and Panda as much as possible in front of like 20,000 people. It was a dream come true from like a comedic standpoint, just trying to think of all like the best ways to approach it. But Mogwai, what was it like kind of knowing that you were going to go into like sort of a joke match there against Panda? Like, what was on the line? What was your thoughts kind of doing that there?
Well, the thing about me and Panda is that even in a matchup like that, we're both very competitive, and we're pretty competitive towards each other ever since we met each other. Not only in Gwent, but in fighting games, in real actual life wrestling. Like we've done a lot.
Actual life wrestling.
Fisticuffs, like actual fighting.
Yeah, so it's like we're we like to compete with each other, and I kind of wanted to continue my role going against him because I did beat him in the Gwent together, and I did face him on the pro ladder before the tournament when he was grinding his Skellige, and I was apparently one of his like only few losses. I was playing the Aridin Nova deck, so I was like, hey, I got your number, bruh.
Was this when we were actually playing at the studio?
No. I played him in the pro ladder before this trip, basically. So. So I was like, I'm gonna get you again in front of like 20K people, and it's like I was confident. I liked my lineup, but that misclick on the ointment actually hurt my heart because I was talking with Panda afterwards, like, I lost that game because of that, right? You weren't getting your card back. He's like, yes, and I'm like, duh. So I don't know what happened. I used that card so much, but this is a good point to like advocate for like different arts for different choices, because it ointment gets weird because you search it first with the Vicovaro Novice and you get the two options. You click on it again, it's as if you were like I thought it was like the two option again, basically. You know what I mean?
I know.
But I should always click on the right side anyways. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? But I misclicked and I lost. I had to drop one more card. He found this fast. And that really sucked for me because if I got the win there with that deck and I got the matchup with my Spy Nova deck, I had a much better matchup against that first build than the second one. The second match, like the third match, was a nightmare for me because the deck was already built, but I had to like basically redo it, right? But I already had built it prior, so I wasn't like gonna counter him or anything. But as I was building the deck, I'm like, oh my god, what the hell am I gonna Regis Litho on this list? He just swarms everything, he has like tiny units all across the board, and I'm like, okay, my chance is to just make sure that he doesn't get on a Rocket's Behemoth. So I'm gonna keep my assassins in my hand. You saw in my mulligan, I kept my assassins. I'm like, I'm not letting those stick around. But then he monsters nest into a fat spider that would not die to anything because it was edges of 1 point too strong, man. 11 points. I couldn't kill it with the assassin. I tried to like roll into like an enforcer and shoot it down, but it was the same situation. It was like 10 damage. And I'm like, no. And then he just started eating it. It was like a billion spiders out of nowhere, harpies flying around. I lost the coin flip, so I was like, yeah. I can't climb that mountain. And then from there hours, it was kind of like, I was just trying to. I even reached a point in which I had to mulligan away Joaquin because I had like Empress, Fragila Vigo. I had like only spies left in my deck, right? But it was fun. I just wanted to get at least the win on him so I could dab, in front of so many people.
Yeah, you did dab. You did dab.
And then I watched the VOD and I saw Merchant talking about how Panda, he entered his hotel room and he was just like staring at the wall doing nothing. And I died.
I was dying on the mic. That was so good. Some of the stuff that Merchant was saying was just amazing. Like I think he had really thought about some of that stuff, but I don't know. That was really good stuff. Comedy gold in the casting there.
But you say like Panda is criminally unfunny. Like
honestly, that's what Gwent is in the end. That's what Gwent is about. Like forget all the competitive stuff. It's just great to sit down with a friend and get beaten, right, Mogwai?
Shit.
And Panda loved it when he got that win. Like on the night afterwards, he was just like rubbing it in all the time. Yeah. I'll get you.
Just a friendly game of Gwent, right? I mean, I thought that. I like that Panda was kind of bringing like a little bit of old school Triss Butterfly spell, like Triss Butterfly spell and stuff like that.
And Mogwai's felt like
Yeah. I mean, triggering on turn end, it made the card look a little bit better. It's going to be hard to get gold value out of her, but because you actually have to remove her, I don't know, maybe there's something I might try here for the faction battle coming up, because it seems like a list that could, if you're still climbing, if you're like me and have been away for a week and are still at 3.1k, I could probably get away playing anything. And I think maybe that might be one of the things that I try. But talking about that Nilfgaard Monsters faction battle, just one more thing I wanted to talk about before we close the podcast, and that is this is it. So let's jump into the strategy section here, and let's talk about what we might see in the meta for the Nilfgaard versus Monsters faction battle right after this.
Maybe not today and not tomorrow, but someday someone will find a way to take you down.
So I believe yesterday we started off with a Monsters versus Nilfgaard faction battle, where the faction you play the most with in casual or ranked or pro ladder play is the faction that you champion. And should your faction win, as in does that faction get the most wins in any games it plays, not necessarily against the opposing faction, there are two special borders on the line. There's a Monsters border and a Nilfgaard border. They look very similar to the frames on the faction cards. They are good looking borders. Only one of these borders will make it into the game as it stands right now, and the other faction just gets 100 meteorite powder, which feels like hardly a trade-off. But I think it's good. It's extra competitive. It's not too dissimilar to what like Destiny 2 does with their faction battles, where like you either win or you don't win, and that's just kind of like it, right? So a lot of people want they want to have like some sort of insurance they don't want to choose the one that loses. They want to still get something, because losing on a border doesn't feel good. But I will say that this isn't the last faction battle we're ever going to have. These borders are probably always going to be faction battle borders. So when they roll around again, people can make different decisions maybe, and then, different factions will be better. Maybe if it was Monsters versus Northern Realms, things would change. But in the previous faction battle, we didn't have a border that was up there. So you're going to see a cooling effect on every other faction. You're going to see a lot of Nilfgaard and Monsters. Mogwai, obviously you're playing Nilfgaard. Just so you guys know, I am spamming Monsters games for the entirety of this faction challenge, because I think that Nilfgaard has a lot more supporters, and I just want to offset that as much as possible and get that Monsters border. Mogwai, can I convince you to not play Nilfgaard? Can I convince you just to play like something else? You don't have to play Monsters, but I just know you're contributing a lot of wins to Nilfgaard, and I'd like you to stop.
That's like asking me not to breathe. What are you doing?